In 1961, President Kennedy called on all Americans to rise to the challenges of the day. He knew that success depended upon the unity of efforts throughout the federal government and the nation. The Greater Boston Federal Executive Board, one of 28 across the country, fosters communication, coordination, and collaboration with federal, state, and local government agencies. This is your federal government, and I am your host, Diane LeBlanc. Hello, everyone. Today we are featuring the Customs and Border Protection Agency, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. Our guest is Kevin Weeks, who is the Director of Field Operations for Customs and Border Protection in New England. Director Weeks, welcome.
Well, thank you, Diane. It's a pleasure to both meet you and have an opportunity to have this conversation today.
Excellent. Your agency, part of the Department of Homeland Security, was only created after the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. But the function of Customs and Border Protection has been around for a very long time. Put it in perspective for folks. Give a little bit of the mission and the history and your agency's role within the Department of Homeland Security.
Well, certainly. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency, which is one of the 22 agencies that were brought under the umbrella of the Department of Homeland Security, we were created out of three legacy agencies. U.S. Customs Service, which was created as a first act of Congress back in 1789. Okay. The U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service, their inspectional unit, as well as the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Animal and Plant Health Services. The inspection services of those three legacy agencies were brought together to leverage the resources and the skills of the officers and agents that made up those three legacy agencies to form the U.S. Customs Service on March the 1st, 2003. Going back to the beginning, U.S. Customs Service, which was known as the Bureau of Customs, was responsible for collecting revenue. In fact, from our beginnings, we were the primary source of revenue to finance the United States. Today, of course, that's not true, because as all your viewers know, the Internal Revenue Service collects quite a bit of more money than we do. However, our mission over time has changed, and because of this newest iteration of now U.S. Customs and Border Protection, we are responsible for enforcing the immigration laws, which are found in Title 8 of the United States Code. We still collect revenue, responsible for collecting the duties, taxes, and fees of imported merchandise that's imported into the United States. We're also responsible for stemming the flow of drugs. That's Title 21 of the U.S. Code. We're also responsible for ensuring that monies that is transported across our borders are properly declared. That's Title 31 of the U.S. State Code. And so it has changed slightly given the threat that our country faces. Our priority mission being preventing terrorists and weapons of mass effect or destruction from being introduced into the U.S. But we enforce like hundreds of laws for other agencies, as well as our functional missions that we have, began enforcing since 1789.
Wow. So thank you for that. I think it really is important for folks to understand the creation of the Department of Homeland Security was really, I think, the most significant reorganization of our government since the creation of the Department of Defense a number of years ago. And those 22 agencies brought together really, as you say, to sort of make sure that communication is flowing and make sure that resources are being appropriately leveraged. Now today, Customs and Border Protection Agency, your agency, it itself has 3 distinct parts. And we're going to focus today on the part that you're responsible for, field operations, but tell folks about the other 2 parts and sort of how you all work together.
Sure. The 3 main operational parts of U.S. Customs Service Border Protection would include the U.S. Border Patrol. They can be identified in the green uniforms, and their primary responsibility is to patrol the borders between the ports of entry, where people are primarily coming into the U.S. We also have an operational component made up of agents formed to patrol the air space and the marine, the coastline of our country, and that's the U.S. Air and Marine Office. And then my office, we're in the blue shirts. We are responsible for ensuring that all activities at our ports of entry, over 300 ports of entries throughout the country, that we have officers there to ensure that we're there to enforce the law, to ensure that we can facilitate movement of both people and goods through our ports of entry and enforce all of the other laws that we talked about previously.
Okay, so again, your function, you are the director of field operations for all 6 New England states, and as you said, you focus on the established points of entry. Now you mentioned 300 nationwide. How many established ports of entry do we have in New England? How many employees do you oversee? Where are those locations?
Sure. The way the Boston field office is structured, we have 3 area ports of entry that oversee many of the crossings and ports of entries throughout the 6 New England states. Overall, in my area of responsibility, I have around 39 defined ports of entry, which would include land border crossings, certainly seaport, and airports. And I have approximately 1,000 officers, as well as agriculture specialists, import specialists, and other support personnel that helps us to accomplish our mission every day.
So a primary function of those staff individuals is to screen travelers at those established points of entry. What's a typical day like for them?
Well, you know, a typical day at, let's say, our land borders, you have vehicles approaching the ports of entry. You'll have people that are traveling for various purposes, whether it's those that want to visit for recreational purposes. You have others that are here to conduct some businesses. There are others that are here to study at area colleges and universities. And you have a lot of family members that live in foreign countries that are coming to visit family, whether it's at the holiday season or some other particular activity, whether it's a wedding or a funeral. And so typically our officers are there to ask the questions, to examine the passports and visas that these individuals would have, basically to ensure that they are who they say they are, to establish citizenship. Some of them are returning U.S. citizens or legally permanent residents, and so we welcome them back. But more importantly, it's important that our visitors to our country feel welcomed also. And so we try to do that in a facilitative way. In a typical day, there are times that, unfortunately, there are people who are trying to circumvent the laws and the regulations that we enforce. And we have those that will show up as imposters. Either they will have real documents, but they're real genuine documents for someone else that they happen to look like. Or they may have bogus or fraudulent documents that were prepared to assist them to get around some of our screening techniques. But, you know, it's a daunting challenge. At times, we'll find narcotics, we'll find weapons, We'll even deal with issues of, surprisingly, the one apple that's in the back seat that would be prohibited because of the pest threat that an apple could pose to domestic industry. And so we would seize those two as a item that would not be allowed into the U.S. So you have, some normal discoveries, and then sometimes you have some rather bizarre discoveries.
So you're checking every traveler.
Absolutely.
And again, you've talked about a lot of different situations that they could come up against, but again, your offices on the front line are responsible for protecting our nation against terrorists and other real threats. And tell us what you can about that and how you go about doing that.
Well, the priority mission, as you've mentioned earlier, is the prevention of a terrorist or a weapon of mass destruction or effect from entering the U.S. Our offices go through a fairly rigorous 16-and-a-half training discipline at our Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Georgia. And at that particular training center, they are trained on not only looking at a traveler, looking at the behavioral reactions, asking certain questions to elicit information to help them make that decision. But they also have been trained in the use of technology. We have officers that are issued radiation pagers, so that if there's any presence of a radioactive isotope on the individual or in their vehicle, we would have an alert to allow us to refer that particular vehicle or person into what we call our secondary examination area, so that we can conduct a much more comprehensive inspection of that vehicle or person. We also have at our ports of entry radiation portal monitors, which again are there to screen every conveyance, whether it's a personally owned vehicle, whether it's a commercial vehicle, whether it's a commercial bus. These are there to ensure that any presence of radiological isotopes are identified and allows us to adjudicate those concerns before the car is allowed to proceed forward. We have a host of other tools that we have also, including our canine teams, which again, we can discuss that a little bit later, but there is a host of tools, a lot of information. We also have our programs that will facilitate our trusted travelers through designated lanes so that their inspection process would be crisper, less intrusive, and a lot quicker, and that's always important for someone that's coming into the country.
So let's talk a little bit about the K-9 program. I was, preparing for our conversation today, and I think one of the facts that I found out there was that Customs and Border Protection Agency has the largest law enforcement K-9 program in the country, some 1,500 dogs strong. How many dogs do we have in New England? How does that work, and what are the dogs finding?
Well, for law enforcement purposes, I never reveal
too much.
How much we have in terms of capacity and resources. However, we do have a cadre of canine teams. Now that consists of not only the canine itself, but a handler that has been trained with that canine, specifically to look for narcotics, to look for weapons, to look for individuals that may be hidden in a cavity of a conveyance. We also have dogs that are really helpful in identifying individuals that perhaps may be bringing in fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, fresh meat, which in many cases is prohibited because of the kinds of threats that it poses to our country. Unfortunately, there are some that will declare that they have one thing. The canine will sniff it out, pardon the pun, and will detect that there's the presence of some prohibited fruits and vegetables or meat. They have been critical to us accomplishing our mission successfully. We do have Canine teams that are just deployed or dispatched to go on commercial vessels as they arrive.
Okay.
Again, they are to look for some of the same threats or discoveries, make some of the same discoveries as we would be looking at our land borders and at our airport. Extremely professional. They are tested regularly to ensure that they continue to perform the mission successfully. And quite frankly, we would be at a loss without them.
Now, what happens to the dogs when they retire?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Retirement of a canine. It does happen after some 7 to 10 years, or if there is some medical reason why the canine can't continue to perform. And so in many cases, surprisingly, maybe not so surprisingly, the handlers adopt the canines that they're working with. As a director of field operations, I have been occasioned to see the canines that are in the agricultural arena, and so I sometimes will place my name in the hat, hoping that I can also be an adoptive parent of a canine in the distant future. But that's what happens to them.
Good, nice. Now, most of the people who are traveling, and you kind of alluded to this, are just average folks, not looking to pose a threat to our nation, not looking to do the wrong thing, just looking to move through the process, get through customs, if you will, as quickly as possible. What advice do you have for them?
Well, for years, we've encouraged individuals that having the information in terms of what could be brought back into the U.S. is critical to closing out a extremely enjoyable vacation or visit. And so years ago, before we became technologically skillful in getting information out, we would publish a Know Before You Go brochure, which pretty much outlines all of the rules that would be in effect for travelers coming back into the U.S. Now, it's on our website now, cbp.gov. Okay. And in essence, there's a wealth of information that a traveler could be exposed to really help them understand the rules that we will be enforcing, but certainly many of the things that are allowed to be brought back into the U.S. and those are the items that are prohibitive. One of the issues that's always concerning to me is travelers are sometimes told a lot of different misinformation by vendors abroad. Because quite frankly, they don't care whether your items are going to be seized when you arrive back in the U.S. Right. They're trying to make a sale. Right. So the best key recommendation would be is take some time to read the information that's published either in the Know Before You Go brochure or on our website. And then we have a host of officers and import specialists that are disposed to answer questions telephonically if there is something specific that you either wasn't able to, get an answer for through your research, or you just want to have the comfort of talking to somebody. We're public servants, right. So we're at the disposal to the public. We want to make sure that they have all of the information they need to make their trip pretty much free from any problems.
Good advice, because I would guess that a lot of the difficulty from the good, average traveler who is wanting to do the right thing probably surrounds those fruits and vegetables that you were talking about, animals, plants, those kinds of common mistakes that people might make. So good advice to go to the website. Now, any numbers on how many travelers are passing through the New England ports in a given year?
Well, in the overall numbers of travelers coming through the ports of entry, I believe last year we had about 4.6 million individuals, as well as members of crew, let's say at our airline partners. Through Logan Airport, which is our busiest international airport, we had, I believe, about 1.7 million passengers and crew that came into the New England AOR area of responsibility, but specifically through Boston. That it's pretty much around a 5,000 to 6,000 passenger count and crew per day.
Wow.
Through the Logan Terminal E, which is where the international flights arrive at. And again, as you alluded, and it's certainly documented, that 99.99% of the individuals really are coming into the country legitimately. It's an extremely small number of those that we really are concerned with that are either coming for illicit reasons or they are attempting to come through with bogus documents.
So if somebody has done their preparation, they've gone to the website, they've done everything correctly, how long should it take them to get through customs?
Well, again, it's a big difference between what kind of port of entry you're coming through. And obviously you have to accommodate for some wait time issues on holidays because you have certainly a spike in the number of people traveling. But for most of our land border ports of entry, if there isn't a traffic issue, they're through fairly quickly, 2 to 3 minutes.
Wow.
Because they're really presenting their passport and in some cases visas, answering questions, and then again on occasion we will randomly select cars for a more intense examination, just to sort of make sure that some of our own targeting capabilities are working. At the airport, at Logan, for example, as I mentioned, the busiest international crossing at an airport, wait times normally around 15 to 25 minutes of getting through primary. And that's because there is usually concurrent arrivals of airlines that are coming through, and all those individuals kind of converge into the federal inspection area. But again, we have tried to encourage those travelers that are traveling internationally on a regular and recurring basis, that they would consider some of our trusted traveler programs, because that would certainly help us and at the same time help them.
So talk a little bit more about that. What is a trusted traveler program?
Well, the concept is that if you're willing as an international traveler or as a person who is a citizen here, but you know you're going to be traveling abroad and returning, we have a couple of programs that will really allow us to vet or examine you prior to your trip. And we would then issue you a card that will enable you to use designated lanes where the examination is very, very limited, and in fact, in some cases, seamless and transparent to the traveler. In the air environment, we call the Trusted Traveler program the Global Entry. In essence, it's a program that allows an individual to be interviewed by an officer prior to travel. There's an application that you can actually apply online. And once we are able to look at your background and we'll take your fingerprints, you'll be in our system. And the net result of that preliminary preparation is when you get off the plane, you will not be traversing through a lane where the officer's in the booth. You, in essence, would be going to a kiosk. You would be inserting either the card or the passport into the kiosk, asked the same questions that would be on the paper declaration that people would have to fill out when they're on the plane. And as long as you haven't bought anything and there isn't any other issue that we should be concerned with, you'll be given a slip and you'll immediately go through and collect your bags and leave the facility.
Makes good sense. How long have these kinds of programs been around?
Well, for a few years now, in fact, and it's a growing program. It's a growing program because of its popularity. In fact, at Logan, we have 2 kiosks. We're actually increasing them to 4 kiosks because of the popularity. And
Is there a cost to the traveler?
there's a $100 fee that would have to be tendered to the government for, but the clearance is good for 5 years, and so it's something that anyone who's traveling should consider. Now that's at the airport. We also have a similar program in partnership with the Canadian Border Service Agency, CBSA. That's our Canadian counterparts, and it's called Nexus, and it allows the same kind of routing of specially designated lanes, where in essence, through the technology, you won't even be talking to an officer, as long as everybody in the car has been issued a Nexus card. And so it would be pretty much a seamless process. It takes a matter of seconds just to get through. And the reason why I mentioned earlier that it helps us, because we're really trying to not have to interact with members of the public when it's not necessary. We'd rather take the limited resources that we have and look for that needle in the haystack. And so we're trying to move the haystack away from the people over to technology.
So that Nexus program, that partnership between the United States and Canada, again, makes perfect sense because there's so much back and forth between our two countries. How long has that been around?
Well, I believe that that's been around, if I'm not mistaken, for about 4 or 5 years now. Again, it's one that we have on the Canadian border. On the Mexican border, we have a similar program called Sentry. So those that may be traveling there, we'd want to look into that.
Okay. At the very beginning, when you talked about sort of the history of customs, and you talked about collecting the fees,
yes,
that remains, you know, one of the functions. So you have a role in facilitating trade and making sure that the appropriate duties and fees are paid, not to the magnitude of the IRS, but large numbers. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Again, you know, the revenue that we collect, I believe nationally, is around over 20 billion a year. And that's a declining amount because of the fact that we, the U.S. government, have entered into a number of free trade agreements and accords with foreign countries. And of course, we have, many of your viewers may be remembering the discussion of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, preceded by the Canadian Free Trade Agreement back in the 90s. And so it really has been an artful discussion as to revenue, but we do still collect some significant revenue. Here in the Boston field office, we collected, I believe last year, over $400 million in duties, taxes, and fees. Not something to sneeze at, but it's certainly significant to collecting the revenue. But our primary focus really is to ensure that goods that are imported into the U.S. aren't held up at the border, because timing for industry is extremely important. For example, you have now importers that are looking to import items for the holiday, and so they can't afford to have their merchandise delayed because they have certain time lines that they're working with to ensure the product is on the shelf.
So we talked about the programs to assist travelers, and we talked about special programs for those travelers who travel frequently. It would follow that those folks who are doing trade business, they are repeat vendors, and what sort of special programs do we have for them to, you know, facilitate the process? As you say, you know, they need their merchandise and the business needs to take place.
Well, one of the main programs that was created, and really as again to address some of the concerns of 9/11, we have a program called the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. It's called CTPAT. And in essence, what it is, it's a partnership between the government and industry. And it was designed to essentially secure the items through what we call securing the supply chain from the point of stuffing. In other words, the merchandise is stuffed into the container and then to the point of delivery, when the goods are released by us and on their way to either a distribution center or specifically to a store. And so through that particular partnership, there have been protocols that have been established, and we have individuals that will go out, validate that the company is doing what it needs to do to secure that container. And it enables us to facilitate those containers much quicker because the company is working with us. They are in essence an extension of us. Right. In terms of making sure that there isn't anything introduced into that container that would cause harm to our country. We have a similar program on the northern border and southern border called FAST, which is Free and Secure Trade. Okay. And in essence, it is a land border program for commercial trucks that are coming into the country from either Mexico or from Canada. And it enables us to not only pre-vet the driver and the company who's sending the goods, but the actual commercial conveyance too. Wow. So it's a pretty much holistic way of ensuring that we have addressed any concerns that we have for those particular shipments. Again, it facilitates the movement of that cargo much quicker than your typical conventional movements that may have to go through a much more rigid examination when it arrives. Some
strong programs, some strong partnerships, and you work with, again, so many different partners. What are some of the major agencies that you work with that aren't within the umbrella of the Department of Homeland Security?
Well, that's a good question, because I know for the most part there are so many that are within DHS. Right. But we work with agencies out of the Department of Justice, for example. One of our strongest partners here in the Boston field office is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We don't have an investigative component within CBP, Customs and Border Protection. We do work along with Homeland Security investigations, which is ICE. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but we have a strong partnership with the Federal Bureau of Investigations. We have a strong partnership with Drug Enforcement Agency. Certainly, we continue to work along with the Department of Agriculture because they do have some policy decisions that we execute and implement within our mission. In fact, surprisingly, we work with the Department of State because of the issuance of the documents that are issued. So there's really a number of federal level departments, and then we do work with the states. Each area port, Maine, Vermont, every New England state, we work with the state police or the state enforcement officials, and then we work with the locals, whether it's a sheriff's county, or here in Boston, I have a very good relationship with Commissioner Davis from the Boston Police Department. So we really interact with all levels of government, both at the federal, state, and city levels. And work together. That's great. So how long have you been a federal employee? I'll let you have a drink and catch your breath. I've been just bombarding you with these questions. No, it's the reason why I was reaching for the cup, because perhaps I don't look it, but I've been with the federal government for just about December 1st, 38 years. So actually, wow. I'm closing in on 4 decades of federal service, which actually, every time I think about it, it's daunting, and it's been a good career, and I continue to plan to work, so this is not a retirement announcement, but 38 years that I've been with either the legacy, U.S. Customs Service, through the transition to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Not all here in Boston. I actually began my career in Buffalo, New York, full-time, and was there for a number of years before transferring to a number of other cities. This job has really enabled me to see parts of my country that I probably wouldn't see had I not had tours of duty in these various locations. And how long have you been in Boston? Well, I'm a native of Boston. I actually grew up in the Roxbury area back in the well, I won't go into the earlier days, but let's say I'm an alumnus of Northeastern University, and in fact, that's how I actually started as a cooperative education student with the U.S. Customs Service then. But I've only been back for 2.5 years. My last duty station was out at Long Beach, California, so I enjoyed the weather there, and I was there for almost 5 years.
Nice. Another successful product of the Northeastern University co-op program.
Absolutely.
I myself, I say to people, this is my co-op job. I liked it, and,
Yes.
and I stayed. So you clearly enjoy your work,
Yes.
and you've had a very distinguished career. Would you recommend this to somebody that's out there that might be watching a career with Customs and the Border Protection Agency?
Absolutely. I mean, I know that right now is rather tough. The federal budget is rather limited at this time, but we are actually still actively recruiting because of the pre-employment requirements. One actually needs lead time to go through the protocols that we put in place to check the applicants out. And so I would urge those that are in college and those that are in high school, you don't really require a college degree, but certainly urge them to apply for positions in U.S. Customs and Border Protection. You know, obviously the more visible positions are those that are in uniform, but we have chemists, we have import specialists, entry specialists, we have regulatory auditors. I mean, we have an array of other positions that are really behind the curtain
Support.
that people that have those skill sets should consider. It's an extremely, in my view, rewarding career. It's hard work, but there is a sense of patriotism because you're protecting not only the citizens and visitors to our country, but you're protecting the Constitution of the United States. I mean, and that's extremely important.
That's a noble cause.
Absolutely. And so it would be, I believe, a perfect career track to consider a job with U.S. Customs and Border Protection. When I graduated in '75, it was tough then in terms of employment. And I was very grateful that I had the cooperative education experience, which also gives you, some real-time experience so that you're more competitive, you're more marketable for looking for a job within an agency like this. And it can spawn to other opportunities, not only here in the U.S. We have employees deployed at 58 or 60, actually, foreign countries.
Wow.
They work in consular offices. They work at the ports examining items that are coming to the U.S. with the officers from that host country. And so internationally, you can really explore the world through U.S. Customs and Border Protection.
Now, do most employees of the Customs and Border Protection Agency, are they required to sign a mobility agreement, or there are some, like those support positions that you were talking about, that if they applied for an opening that might be in Boston, would they be assured of staying in Boston? How does that work?
Well, a couple of things. When I graduated from Northeastern, I actually was envisioning working at Logan Airport. Unfortunately, at the time, there weren't any vacancies, and so I had to consider 2 locations, and I ultimately decided to work in Buffalo, New York. There are opportunities that if you want to return back home, there are times when you can do that. There isn't a mobility clause that is required at the lower levels of the positions that we have, but when you get to my level, as a former commissioner said to me, Kevin, you serve at the pleasure of the agency. Yeah. And so, one understands that when you apply for a job as a director of field operations. This is my 3rd field office I've actually led. I led a field office in Detroit, and then, as I mentioned, out in California at Long Beach, and then, of course, now we're in Boston.
Well, I think we're lucky to have you here in Boston and serving the New England area. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground this morning. Is there anything that we've not talked about that you think our viewers need to know?
Well, I guess in terms of speaking to the viewers, I just want them to know that the U.S. Customs and Border Protection stands vigilantly ready to protect and to secure our borders. We have a very important mission, but our officers are dedicated to ensuring that our country remains safe. And so many times we do hear from people that see us in restaurants and they say, thank you for your service, sort of like what the military receives on occasion. So we haven't talked about it, but I think that all of your viewers know that we stand ready to serve.
So it's a good end a good way to end our program. Thank you so much.
And thank you.
I do want to thank Director Weeks for being with us today and for helping us to better understand the work of the United States Customs and Border Protection Agency, and in particular, the work of the frontline employees who are responsible for screening travelers and cargo at established ports of entry. I thank you for watching, and I hope that you will continue to join us as we feature other federal agencies on your federal government.